Hello, guys, and welcome to the Heritage Agendas Football Podcast. As always, myself, Ibrahim. Just myself today for episode number 32. Today, we're going to be doing my season preview. I'm going to be talking through the major leagues, doing the 20 to 1 in the Premier League as we had last season. Talking through some of the transfers. Obviously, we'll get more in depth as the market continues to evolve. I'm recording this on the 16th. This is after the United game has finished, but these predictions were locked in before, so I'll get to talk through my thoughts. Um, and yeah, it's been an exciting summer. Of course, Spain, the Euro, and Olympic winners. A lot of really, really exciting moves in the transfer market throughout all of the major leagues. As we get ready for another exciting season. So we won't waste too much time. I've done the four major leagues. I left out League One. I think League One for me, there's a couple interesting teams to talk about. Obviously, the project at Olympic Marseille with Roberto De Zerbi going from Brighton there. I think that they will be in the Champions League places, but I still think that you know that league is kind of a wash for me. I think PSG will run away with it in the end, even without Kylian Mbappe, who of course we'll talk about later. But we will start with La Liga on the topic of Kylian Mbappe. Of course, Real Madrid coming off the 2-0 Super Cup win against Atalanta. So we'll kind of work ourselves up. So I have in seventh place, I did the top seven for La Liga, the top seven for Serie A, the top four for the Bundesliga, and the top 20 for the Premier League. Number seven in La Liga, I have Girona. I think that the combination between losing some of their better players in Alex Garcia and Savio, of course, to Bayer Leverkusen and Manchester City, respectively, is going to obviously take a toll. And that the addition of Champions League for that club is gonna be difficult to manage. So that's why I see the slip. Obviously, of course, they also lost Artem Dovbyk to Roma. Number six, I have Betis. And at number five, I have Real Sociedad. Obviously, for Real Sociedad, super, super important to keep Zubimendi, who is going to be staying there for another season. Obviously, rejected Liverpool a couple days before this recording. So I have Real Sociedad at five, and then we head into the top four. So my number four is Athletic Bilbao. I think Ernesto Valverde continues to show why he's an extremely underrated manager in terms of the league. For sure, obviously at Barcelona, that was his great success was the domination in La Liga. Obviously, continental competitions is where he struggled the most, and of course, keeping Nico Williams, who had the incredible summer and was linked to a flurry of really really high European clubs. Obviously, the Barcelona saga was one that ran rampant for a big portion of the summer. Excuse me. Keeping him, making him their new number 10 was huge, and I think that they continue to be obviously San Mamés is one of the toughest places to play in Spain. So I think that they will get fourth. Then we get into obviously the big three, and I think that La Liga is going to be interesting this year. Um, and not much of a throwaway league the way it was last year, where it felt like all the leagues were close except for Spain and France deep into the season. At number three, I have Barcelona, and obviously the debacle with Xavi leaving and then coming back and then getting sacked again for Hansi Flick, dominated a lot of the early summer news. Not being able to get Guido Rodriguez because of FFP, and at this point, their big signing has been Dani Olmo. They haven't been able to get Nico Williams. Here's why I put Barcelona. I think that the other team at third. I think the other two teams have improved more than them. And Dani Olmo, while it is a great signing, my only concern is that I don't think it fits the pressing needs for Barcelona. So obviously, Dani Olmo is a player who was fantastic for Spain this summer, who's an amazing progressive midfielder, very, very good playmaker. But I think that the two biggest needs right now for Barcelona are a winger on the left and a DM. And I think that they haven't really addressed those positions. Obviously, Romeo on the way out. They're going to have more and more reliance on Lamine Yamal. Um, and we're going to see who they bring up from the academy. Of course, Barcelona Olmo, Gavi are great, but they don't really have that type of midfielder that can sit deep. I really thought that they should have been in the market for someone like an Amadou Onana, who of course we'll talk about later. Um, and not being able to get Nico Williams is a big disappointment. So I think the other two teams, obviously the two clubs in Madrid, are far superior now in terms of quality. I think that they increased the gap this summer. Obviously, Hansi Flick is a great league manager, and they have great individual quality. Of course, Lamine Yamal, who was fantastic all summer at the Euros. Getting back Pedri and Gavi is important, and they have good players at certain positions, and Lewandowski in this Hansi Flick system where he was so lethal a couple years back. But I have them third. In my second place, I have Atletico Madrid, and I can't talk highly enough about the clearance that they did over the last couple years to build up to this summer, and how successful this summer window has been for them. I mean, to bring in someone like a Julian Alvarez to be in the mix for Dobvik, and then Dobvik obviously the issue with the personal terms, so he goes to Roma, and to instantly pivot to a plan B in Sorloth, who's not far off if he's not on the same caliber or a little above. Obviously, both of those two are in the running for the Golden Boot. To get someone like a Conor Gallagher, who's a perfect Simeone player in terms of being aggressive, being great in one on ones. Um, Someone who can connect with DePaul and really take a team's number one midfield option out of a game, if needed, of course, with the solidity behind him that Simeone teams always tend to have, especially in cup competitions, where his style of play is extremely effective. To bring in someone like a Robin Lenormand, oh my goodness, Robin Lenormand, um, a center back who was great for Spain in the summer as well. And obviously, right now they're in talks to get Longley, so another center back to solidify what they've done over the last 2 years. I mean, to lose Morata, who was big for them the last couple of years, and to replace them with all the names I just mentioned, I think that this La Liga campaign is going to go down to the wire. And obviously, number one, I think no surprises. I have Real Madrid. Um, not too much movement this summer. Of course, we've been talking about Kylian Mbappe and his move to Real Madrid. It's now official, obviously, and he's played his first game already and scored. It's going to be interesting to see. I think the biggest question marks for Real Madrid is going to be health, specifically in defense. Last season, they were able to compensate for Militao and Alaba's lengthy injuries, but this year only three really full fit center backs. I don't think Ancelotti has a lot of trust in using Jesus Vallejo for long spells, but those three, Rudiger, Militao, Alaba, and obviously we'll see if anyone comes in from now. We have 2 or 3 weeks until the end of the window, so we'll see maybe if there's is something involving Alfonso Davies or Trent Alexander-Arnold or another center back, maybe a Mats Hummels. Um, but I mean, this attack is just unbelievable. The emergence this summer of someone like an Arda Güler, who we saw late into last season, doing great things. For Real Madrid, and really carried that form to the Euros, where for Turkey he was their star. So um, bringing in someone like Endrick, who's going to be able to take the load off of Mbappe in those games for the B team in air quotes. And obviously, when you bring in someone on the caliber of Kylian Mbappe, who I consider to be the best player in the world, I mean, the question marks were always on fit. It looks like it's going to be kind of like a rotational nine, where when Vinny goes to the left, he's in the middle, and when Mbappe goes to the left, Vinny fills the space. Even Rodrigo, we saw in the Super Cup, was playing through the left, and really interchanging it. It's like Ancelotti talked about in his recent podcast with John Obi Mikel. There's 68 meters, so just they need to fill that space with the three. Obviously, I talked about Arda Güler, I talked about Endrick, Jude Bellingham, of course, fantastic as always. Eduardo Camavinga, who got injured but should be back soon, and Chouameni and Valverde, who's now at number 8. So I think that Real Madrid, in the end, will win this league, but I think it will be close. I think within 5 to 10 points max. Um, so I think we will have a really good La Liga campaign on our hands, and I think that the league is really starting as a whole to get back to the quality that was it was so synonymous with in the 2010s. Moving on from La Liga to the Serie A. So The Serie A is an interesting one. Obviously, some really big signings this summer. Most importantly, for Juventus, who we'll talk about. But I have Lazio in my seventh place with Atalanta in my sixth. Obviously, this league had, I believe, 9 teams that went to Europe last season, which was just phenomenal. It's really becoming the most competitive league in the world in terms of parity and how many teams can win it. Atalanta Gasperini, of course, has been in talks with Lazar Samardzic. For one, they obviously bring in Charles de Ketelaere and Matteo Retegui. Um, we're gonna see how they're gonna handle the Champions League. Obviously, the competition balance is important, but I mean, last season we saw them focusing on the Europa League late into the season, and it paid off. Obviously, they won the final over an incredible Bayern Leverkusen team. In fifth place, I have Roma and Daniel De Rossi's team. They've made a couple of great signings this summer, including Soleil and Enzo Lefebvre, as well as they've been in talks, I believe, to bring in Federico Chiesa. So if that can happen and they can hold on to Dybala for the rest of the window, they might be in the challenge for the top four. I think there's a little bit of quality difference between them and the next teams that I'm going to bring up, but they had a really good end to the last season. Obviously, Europa League semifinal. Um, and now that Daniel De Rossi has a full summer to really implement his style, we'll see where they go from there. At number four, I have AC Milan. Obviously, they bring in Alvaro Morata to replace Olivier Giroud. Players like Emerson as well. Um, yeah, I think fourth is a good position for them, considering the teams that I'm about to bring up next. Third place, and this is a team that some people have flirted with a little bit higher in the table. I have Antonio Conte's Napoli. Obviously, right now the big issue is with Victor Osimhen and what's going to happen with him from now to the end of the window. I think he stays potentially. I'd say it's like a 70-30 of him staying. It looks like the main buyer would be Chelsea, and they look like they want to do some kind of loan with an obligation to buy potentially. But obviously they bring in someone like Alessandro Buongiorno, and they're in talks to bring in Romelu Lukaku, who is someone who's had a tremendous amount of success with Antonio Conte in the past, obviously at Inter. And I think usually the first season for Conte is one where the team tends to play well. Then at number two, I actually have Inter, last season's champions, number 20. Um, I think that they bring in Fratesi. Um, Not much else. It hasn't been that big of a window. Obviously, the last time they won the Serie A, they got poached the summer after. Um, I think them being in second for me is a testament to how good I rate the team in first, obviously, which is Juventus. Um, I mean, Juventus this summer bring in one of my favorite coaches in all of Europe, and Thiago Motta, who had a fantastic season last season with Bologna. Um, and they have made a ton of signings and really cleared the house of the players that Thiago Motta doesn't see fit the project. Excuse me. Obviously, they were in the running for Calafiori. They didn't get him, but they got Douglas Luiz. They got Turam. Um, and I believe Nico Gonzalez is next up too from Fiorentina. So I think that Juventus will win the league. I think that Inter will get second. I think that this league is going to be, within a few points deep, deep, deep into the season. And we'll see from there. But I think Juve climb back to the top. I think Inter second, Napoli third, AC Milan fourth. The final league from the three I wanted to discuss is the Bundesliga. So for the Bundesliga, I did the top four. I'm just going to run through them a little quick. I had at fourth RB Leipzig, at third Borussia Dortmund, at second Bayern Leverkusen, and at first I think that Bayern Munich will win the league again. Vincent Company, we can start really from the top. I think is the best here. Vincent Company has done a fantastic job with the board. Obviously, after the huge disappointment last season with Thomas Tuchel and the debacle with who's going to be the manager this season, um, excuse me, to bring in Michael Olise, Palinha, um, is fantastic. Obviously, they've been in the mix for Jonathan Tah as well, which I think may get over the line before the end of the window. I mean, these are fantastic signings. For Dortmund, the same story to bring in Gurasi, from Stuttgart. Obviously losing Fulkrug hurts, but he's a fantastic replacement. And obviously to bring in Maximilian Bayer as well. Um, they continue to be very, very good. Obviously Stuttgart last season were second, so I have them in fifth. I think losing Ito hurts. But bringing in Undav full time obviously was important. And so for Bayern Leverkusen, Xabi Alonso's team, of course, undefeated last season. They bring in Alex Garcia, Terrier, very good signings, but I think that Bayern Munich, in terms of firepower, will climb back and obviously regain their throne after, I believe it was 11 consecutive Bundesligas before last season. So those are the other four leagues from the main five. Before we jump into the Premier League, obviously that's going to be kind of the bulk intensive portion of this episode. Usually this episode actually is exclusively Premier League, but I thought it would be good to open it up, talk about the other leagues. I know we talk a lot about the Prem on this podcast, so those are the other four leagues, and it's obviously going to be interesting to see as the campaign unfolds. We're going to talk about the major stories and, of course, the biggest competition in club football, the Champions League. So we'll see where that goes. So into the Premier League, and for those of you who are watching on YouTube, obviously there'll be the display on the left, which will show the table. But for those of you listening, we'll walk through teams from 20 to 1. I'll kind of explain some of their moves in the transfer window, and my rationale for them being at this spot in the table, and we'll see how right/wrong I am obviously at the end of the season when we revisit. So at the bottom, I have Southampton. If I can find them. So Southampton are my 20th. Really, my reason is they kind of squeaked through, of course, the playoffs last season, beating Leeds, and not too many signings this summer. They brought in Archer from Aston Villa, Ben Barrington Diaz from Villarreal, Flynn Downs from West Ham, and Harwood Bellis from Man City. Not too many losses as well, to be fair. So last season, they barely got up through the championship. They were not one of the two automatic qualifiers, and they spend compared to the other teams, I think that their club was the one that needed the most reinforcement. Obviously, to bring in someone like Adam Lallana is really good. We saw um, how helpful having veteran depth for Luton Town last year was. Excuse me, believe with Ross Barkley. Um, so I mean, we'll see how they fare. Um, but I think that they are my bottom. In 19th, I have Leicester City. Excuse me. Obviously, the big news with Leicester is they lost their manager Maresca to Chelsea. So last season's first place team, they played. Obviously, they had such an incredible team for the championship. From the surprise going down, obviously, Patson Daka, Jamie Vardy was in Ndidi, excuse me. I think they've made some good signings this summer. Obviously, they have the reason I have them 19th is because of the looming verdict with the points deduction. But to bring in Buonate from Brighton on a loan is really good business. Fatawu from Sporting is really good. But obviously they lose Dewsbury Hall to Chelsea, who follows Maresca. And Steve Cooper, I have some questions. Typically, his history shows that he's really, really good at taking a team up to the Premier League, but not as good as keeping them in the Premier League. So between that, obviously, and the looming points deduction over their head, I'm gonna have them in 19th. Obviously, last season we had three promoted teams who went straight back down, and I have my bottom two being teams that came back up. I think the quality difference between the teams that are coming up and excuse me, the teams that are coming up and the teams that are already in the Premier League is getting wider and wider and wider every year as we see this insane spending toward the top, especially. So in 18th, I have Nottingham Forest. So um, this was a little bit of a surprise because obviously a lot of people had Ipswich here. We'll talk through this. In terms of Nottingham Forest, I think that the big thing for me was their performance last season, kind of just squeaking by, um, 17th, 32 points. And they didn't really get that much better this season. Obviously, Nuno Espirito Santo was brought in, in the year. They get someone in Nikola Milenkovic, who I've always rated from Fiorentina, tall center back, um, and Jota Silva. But obviously, they lose Vladimir, they lose Mangala, they lose Freuler, and they lose Niakate. So I think the combination of not really filling the gaps of the players that they lost, I think it's going to be a really, 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 really big struggle for Nuno, and I have them as the last of my three relegated teams. Then we move on to 17th. And 17th, I'm not going to put them any higher. I think that would be insane. But Ipswich, obviously the crazy, crazy rise from League One all the way to the Premier League. I mean, to go from League One to Championship to Premier League is insane. And obviously to survive in the Premier League is even crazier. I think a lot of people have them going straight down. I can 100% see it. I think they've done a really, really good job in terms of their signings. To get someone like Omari Hutchinson from Chelsea, great signing. To get Jacob Greaves from Hull City, great signing. And obviously someone who a lot of Premier League fans are familiar with in Delap as the striker, I think is really important to have a proper striker. And they also addressed goalkeeper in Muric from Burnley, who has Premier League experience last season. So the combination of these things, and I think a really, really good manager in Kieran McKenna, who had a spell under Ole's staff at Manchester United, so obviously has some Premier League experience as a manager. And also they bring in Calvin Phillips, so someone who can play as a DM with a lot of Premier League experience for both Leeds, West Ham, and Manchester City. So I have them 17th. I think the gap between Ipswich and Forest is going to be, negligible. I think maybe a couple points. So very easily can see them going down, but I think they've just done enough in terms of their signings to justify putting them at this position. Excuse me. We head into 16th. So at 16th, I have Everton. I really contemplated the idea of them going down this season, but I think that the way that they play with Sean Dyche, excuse me, and really the success that he had in the past last season with Everton, all those point deductions, and they were really comfortable towards the end. I mean, looking now, even with the deduction, 14 points above the drop. Uh, Losing Amadou Onana and Ben Godfrey, excuse me, hurts a lot. But they did well considering all the financial issues looming over their head. To bring in Jake O'Brien and Iliman Ndiaye is good business. We'll see. Obviously, Branthwaite may leave. I think he stays this year. But and bringing back Mope on loan helps a lot too. So we'll see. In terms of Everton, I can see them finishing anywhere from 15th. I can see them flirting with relegation. But I have them 16th this season. And it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens with them. Obviously, Dyche's contract is up at the end of the summer. Whether he stays, what happens with the new stadium, what happens with their signings. But it seems like every single year they get closer and closer to relegation, and then they get to the summer and the squad gets worse and worse. So I put them 16th just based on their performance last year, even with a deduction. But I could see them potentially even going down or doing better. It just really depends on how the squad gels. We go to 15th, and at 15th, I have Wolves. Now, this one was really, really difficult because they lost easily their best two players last season in Pedro Neto and Max Kilman. Obviously, Mateus Cunha was also in that mix. So Gary O'Neill has done a pretty good job. Obviously, last season 14th, 46 points. Um, and they get a couple players back on loan. That were on loan, excuse me. Sasa Kalazidic, Daniel Podence, Gonzalo Guech. So I think that Wolves finish 15th, but I can very easily see them like Everton mixing up and down. Maybe if Ipswich go down, if it's Forest who comes up a little bit, if it's Leicester without the points deduction and they can make some signings. But this 13 to 17 for me was really difficult to rank. Then we get into number 14, and at that position I have Brentford. This is the team I actually predicted to go down a couple years back. They've become kind of a staple in. They've become a staple, excuse me, in the Premier League. They brought in two players, Fabio Carvalho from Liverpool and Igor Thiago, who's had some concerns. I think the big question mark with Brentford is what happens with Ivan Toney, obviously. Um, does he leave or does he stay? Obviously, Solanke, who we're going to talk about soon, to Tottenham, kind of rules out. I think just Arsenal is the team I can really see making a big move for someone like him. If they can keep someone like an Ivan Toney, who last season obviously had the suspension, came back, they were able to stay safe. Then I think that 14th is fair, and I think it's very, very feasible. Thomas Frank, of course, is a very, very good manager, and has done really, really well with a Brentford team, who a lot of people predicted to go down and then go down the second year, and they've really come into the Premier League and instantly hit the ground running, which is not something we see often. Obviously, sometimes we see like a second season slump or a third season slump. I think that they are 14th, but I think if Ivan Toney leaves and they don't replace him, big, big trouble. I could very easily see them as low as 18th. Then we go into 13th, and at 13th, I have Brentford. Iraola, obviously, I think is a fantastic manager. I think he's due a move soon in the next couple of years, kind of based on what happens this summer. Obviously, I think the big thing here is Dominic Solanke, who I was just talking about. He leaves. But I mean, a testament to the board, to the manager, to the recruitment. They've done a fantastic job. First of all, Solanke leaves for 65 million euros. They replace him with Evan Nielsen, who's a fantastic player from Porto with European experience. Sinistera from Leeds, who has experience in the Eredivisie and in the Premier League with Leeds. Enes Unal, who was good for Getafe last season, and Dean Howson, who's someone that Jose Mourinho has spoken of very, very, very highly, as well as Julian Araujo from Barcelona. So I think those signings that I just mentioned are fantastic. I actually flirted with putting them a little higher, past the next team I'm going to talk about. But I think losing Solanke, obviously, who had 19 goals for them last season, and replacing him with fantastic players all across the front line. So doing kind of what we saw with the Aston Villa model when they lost Grealish and replacing him with three players, we kind of see the same thing. Losing Solanke and replacing him with Evan Nielsen, Unal, and Sinistera is fantastic. Sturdying up the defense is important as well. And really outside of Solanke, the team stays virtually intact. So I have them at 13, right behind Crystal Palace. Now, Crystal Palace was a really, really interesting one to rank for a couple of reasons. Obviously, last year they lose Roy Hudson, and Oliver Glasner comes in, and the back end of the season they were just unbeatable. They finished 10th, and the back end of the year was just win after win after win. They kept Eze for now. I think he stays. I think that's very, very important to them. They bring in Kamada, but they lose Michael Olise, which is really, really difficult, and they haven't really replaced him well enough. I think Ismail Assar is a good player. I don't think he's the same profile of player in terms of his capabilities, but I think he's someone with Premier League experience, with the experience in the French league as well. Obviously, bringing him from Marseille, and Chadi Rayad is a very, very good center back who they brought from Betis. So I have them 13th, but I could also see them slipping to 15th, or maybe they just keep up their form and they finish as high as, ninth, 8th, who knows. But I think that 13th or 12th, excuse me, my lord, is a good place for them, right above Bournemouth, who I was, really for a while thinking of putting them a little under Bournemouth, but I think this is a good position for them. Then we go to number 11, and number 11 I had Fulham. Marco Silva's Fulham, I think the question marks are two things: losing Tosin Adrabayoyo, Adra, just let's call him Tosin, and Joao Palhinha. That's the big hole for them, in my opinion, the DM spot. They bring in Emil Smith Rowe, I think is fantastic business. Scott McTominay, I think if they can get that over the line, fantastic business. They bring back Sessegnon from Tottenham, and Jorge Cuenca from Villarreal is a good signing. I think the big thing for me is just question marks about if they can replace the DM. But I think that Emil Smith Rowe is fantastic if they can bring in, and I think they will, Scott McTominay and or a DM of his caliber. I trust Marco Silva to get them into a position um, to be safe and who knows, maybe even challenge for Europe. But I think, like I said, bringing in players of this quality, of Smith Rowe and of McTominay for a club in mid table for the Premier League is extremely important to replace who they lost. Then at number 10, I have Brighton. So Brighton obviously lose Roberto De Zerbi this summer. He goes to Marseille. They bring in a 31-year-old coach, Fabian Herzler, excuse me, who doesn't have that much experience. And they lose a couple of important players. Pascal Gross to Borussia Dortmund. He was extremely important to them. Adam Lallana was extremely important to them as well. Obviously, Fati was back. He wasn't all that. But they bring in Mats Wiefer, Brian Gruda, Ibrahim Osman, and Yankuba Minte from Newcastle. Um, I think this has been kind of what Brighton have been all about. They've always recruited well. They are obviously sitting on a boatload of money from being a selling club in the past couple of years. And I think this is the season that they really needed to go for it to strengthen the squad, especially with their manager leaving and having to potentially have a new identity. And that's exactly what they did. So they spent 122 million this summer. I think the big question marks is just how are they going to play? Um, we don't really know too much about their manager, obviously. So I think the first couple of weeks are going to be really, really important. And obviously, they've recruited young, as they always do. I think this is a big season for Enciso, for Joao Pedro, especially to get back Mitoma, to see Igor. And Evan Ferguson, obviously, last season was up and down. So can he take the next step before potentially a big summer move next season? But I think I have them in 10th. I think they have more quality than the teams I've listed, from the beginning of the Premier League talk to now. But I just can't see them finishing above any of the teams that I'm about to mention. And the top half is absolutely loaded this season for the Premier League. So I think 10th is a good place. We go to ninth, and this honestly was insanely difficult. Ninth, I have Newcastle. Um, ninth, I have Newcastle. Newcastle to bring Sandro Tonali back in the fold to excuse me to bring Sandro Tonali back is basically like a new signing, obviously after the suspension, but they haven't really done much else. And I thought that this season would be the next step in their project. I don't know how much of that is financial fair play. I think the big question for me with Newcastle is Eddie Howe. I don't think he lost the season. I don't think he has the dressing room and the board. And I don't know if their reluctance to spend is a byproduct of the fact that they just don't trust him to be, the seer of this project long term. Not having European football to worry about is big. Obviously, last season they had the Champions League, which was extremely difficult for them to manage both at the same time, especially towards the beginning of the season where we saw, a lot of struggles. But I still have a lot of question marks. Obviously, they bring in Vlachodimos. And Tonali, like I said, is the new signing. Obviously, last season barely played. And, they have someone of his caliber now who they signed for 80 million a couple years ago. I think ninth is where they finish, but I think next year is where we might see the takeoff with potentially a new manager and a lot of summer spending. Eighth is going to be another surprise. Eighth is going to be Aston Villa. Um, the logic with Aston Villa is that not only do they have to manage the Champions League, which is going to be extremely difficult for them, um, but they lost arguably their most important player. Some say it's Ollie Watkins. I say it's Douglas Luiz. Obviously, to bring in Amadou Onana, who we talked about earlier, is extremely important for Unai Emery's side. To bring in Ian Matson, who was at Dortmund last season and really played a pivotal role in their run to the run to the Champions League final. Um, I mean, I just think the Premier League, especially these top clubs, is just like an insane arms race. So Onana, Matson, Archer, Philogene, Iling Jr. is a really good player from Juve. They bring in Ross Barkley from Luton. So it's crazy to say that this is a team that would finish eighth, but especially because they finished fourth last season, and they have such a great manager. But I think them having the Champions League, which is going to be a huge focus, especially with the new format with the ten group games, not the 8 games, and the league format, that makes me think that it's going to be a problem in terms of fixture congestion with how many games, especially England, where you have to play 2 cup competitions. Then at number 7, I have West Ham. Um, and for West Ham, I think the big thing is obviously David Moyes leaves. They bring in a coach of extremely high quality in Lopetegui, and their window has been unbelievable. Guido Rodriguez, Todibo, Fulkrug, Somerville, and Max Kilman, just to name a few. Obviously, Luis Guilherme, but he's a young product from Brazil. It's been a fantastic window for them. Their like signings last season and this season were fantastic. Um, Obviously, they have Gerard Bowen. Now they bring in a proper number 9 in Fulkrug. Mohamed Kudus, who is fantastic for them. They obviously bring in Guido Rodriguez, and they still have Edson Alvarez, excuse me. Um, and now they bring in 2 center backs into Debo, Kilman, and a right back in Wan Bissaka with Emerson and Areola. This is a fantastic, fantastic squad. I think one that's gonna, really, really give a lot of the top teams in the Premier League a lot of problems, and a team honestly that I could very easily see finishing above any of the teams that I'm about to mention. Maybe bar the top 2, top 3, but I can see this team challenging for top 4. I think they will. Um, I just think that the other teams have a little bit more experience and more talent, but in terms of recruitment and transfers, it's been, just fantastic for West Ham. And, seeing David Moyes leave and seeing Lopetegui come in, I think it's been a lot about the board this summer who's been making the moves. But this has been fantastic recruitment, and they've brought in, players that frankly a couple of years ago maybe would have been above their weight. But, very, very excited to see what Lopetegui can do with a team of this quality. All right, now we head into the top 6. I think this is what a lot of people are really excited about. This, honestly, I think even like 9, 8, 7 for me, this has been the hardest year to predict the Prem just because of how good these teams are getting, how many question marks we have. I think everyone knows the top 2, but I think like between 3 and 9, I think everyone has a different order. I'm gonna start with 6. I think it's Spurs, and this is so unfair because I rate their coach a lot. Ange Postecoglou is great. They spent a lot of money this summer to fill a lot of holes. Wilson Odobert from Burnley is fantastic. Archie Gray, obviously, we've heard really, really good things. I think his name is Mikey Moore, has been a prospect that they've been really, really high on. And then obviously the huge signing just a week ago, Dominic Solanke, 65 million euros to have a proper number 9 for such a pragmatic, high pressing team. And they sold Emerson Royal to AC Milan. I think the big thing for Tottenham is their defense. Question marks at the back. They didn't really address center back too much this summer. Obviously, last summer they addressed keeper. Their fullbacks, we'll see what happens this summer with that. Their midfield, I don't have a problem. Obviously, James Madison missed a portion with injury. They were the surprise at the beginning. I think 10 games in to the league last year, they were the leaders. But I mean, we'll see. I think this is going to be a team that scores a lot of goals. I think the problem for me is with how good these teams in the mid tables have been getting, not having such a sturdy defense and great center back options is going to hurt them in the long term. I think that they're going to have a couple 2-2 or 1-1 games where they just dominate the game, and then they concede a bad goal towards the end. So I have them 6th for that reason, but I think this is such an exciting team with Son, Solanke, Gray, Madison, Kuluchevsky, etc. But I have them 6th. And number 5, I'm going to have Chelsea. So, I mean, Chelsea, I think the big thing this summer has been how many signings they've made. And obviously their new manager, Maresca. So, I think a really good thing for Chelsea has been how good they've been as a selling club. Matson, Hall, Hutchinson, and Gallagher should bring in around 140 million. They've always been really, really good at selling. Um, and this summer they brought in a ton of young options. Mark Guiu from Barcelona, Caleb Wiley, Vega, and El Selmino, Kellyman. But really, we're going to focus on a couple. Pedro Neto, fantastic winger. Kieran Dewsbury Hall, that's a good midfielder who Enzo Maresca obviously had last season at Leicester. And Philip Jorgensen for goalkeeper, a position I think that they needed and a really, really good option at that position. The thing about Chelsea, and obviously Tosin from Fulham, who we talked about earlier, they brought him in on a free. Very good business. I think the big thing for Chelsea, and I think they will clean up the squad before the end of the window. I think we're going to see a lot of outgoing sales and loans. Um, how they're going to line up, what happens with Victor Osimhen, and what happens with Joao Felix, who I think they're going to sign in the next couple days. Um, Question marks on Maresca, how he's going to play. He's been someone who's always wanted to play like a 4-3-3 in possession with the ball. Very, very, energetic, possession based system. He's very, people describe him as stubborn. So, how is Chelsea going to play, when they have to go to the Emirates or the Etihad or Old Trafford or Anfield, excuse me. I think that's what's going to hold them back is, not. We're going to see, obviously, I haven't watched too much of Maresca. I've watched some analysis. But how does he adapt? Um, Obviously, I think it's going to help them a lot in the games where they're favorites, but how does he adapt when they go away from home and they're big underdogs or it's a huge match at home? Obviously, we get to see it immediately on the weekend with City. So, um, I'm interested to see how they line up. Obviously, I like the roster a lot. I think Lavia, Enzo, Dewsbury Hall, and Caicedo is a fantastic four to pick three or two from. I think they're gonna have three, obviously, with Lavia sitting as I think the pivot. Um, if they can get the Cucurella that played for Spain in the Euros, that's great. Reece James obviously is fantastic when healthy, but that's a huge asterisk. So they have Malo Gusto and they have Badiashile and Fofana. And then up top, they have Pedro Neto now, Cole Palmer, obviously last season, who was fantastic, and either Nicholas Jackson, Christopher Nkunku, or Joao Felix. So how they're going to play it, I have no idea, or Victor Osimhen, which I don't think will happen, but we'll see. How they're going to play it is going to be very, very interesting. But I mean, when you read that squad, that is a top six squad for me. They have tons of depth. Obviously, they've signed so many players. They have like 74, not 74, excuse me, like 40 first team players, which is nuts. So I think that's going to be cleaned up a lot before the end of the window. But let's see. Obviously, this is a very, very interesting way to run a football club, all these signings, but I'm very interested to see what happens between now and the end of the window and how many loans they have outgoing, how many sales they have outgoing. I think Chalaba will be sold. I think Gallagher will be will be finalized. But yeah, we'll see what happens with Chelsea. But I think fifth is fair. Obviously, last season they burned me. I had them third, and they ended up finishing sixth with the late push. Then we get into the top four, and the top four, obviously, I'm gonna start with a big surprise. I have Liverpool fourth. Couple of reasons. First of all, I think it's pretty crazy to think that someone is gonna. Obviously, Arne Slot is a great coach. Someone will come in to a club where Klopp has been there forever, and then we're gonna instantly see the same levels that we've seen the last season. I think that they're going to be closer to fifth than they will be to third. I think that they're going to be closer to seventh or eighth than they're going to be to first. I think I think it's an insult to Klopp to say that there's not going to be at least a small transition period. And on top of that, they haven't signed anyone to this point. And I have big questions about their squad. Obviously, when healthy, they have great players. Salah is one of the best wingers in the league. Virgil van Dijk is one of the best center backs in the league. I rate Kwanzaa a lot. Trent Alexander-Arnold, regardless of the question marks defensively, attacking, I think he's the best fullback in the world. Allison is on the decline, but he's still one of the best goalkeepers in the world. And obviously, they have Mamardashvili, who I think they want to sign in 2025. That's what they're working on right now. Darwin Nunez, we'll see. Obviously, he's up and down. A lot of people thought that last season he was going to be unlocked. Is this the season for him? If it's not him, is it Jota, who, missed portions of last season, but is still a great player? And then Luis Diaz and Cody Gakpo are very good on the left. They have a lot of talent. I think the question marks are Andy Robertson and Simicas. I think that left back is a big weakness, something that they should address. And then DM. I don't think Gravenberch I think Gravenberch, Endo, and McAllister is a good midfield, but I think they need a DM. I think they missed out obviously last season on Lavia and Caicedo, and it's something they haven't addressed. If they can get Ugarte, that's a different question, but I think Ugarte goes to the team I have in third, which is United, who we'll talk about soon. But I think I need to see signings before the end of the window. Otherwise, I'm concerned. Obviously, I think that they'll get top six no matter what, but I think that they might be in a battle for this fourth spot. And I have my third as Manchester United. Um, I think the big question for United for me is one, and that's the manager. I think he should have been gone last season. We obviously talked about him a lot on this podcast. Um, for me, Ten Hag's job was really saved by the FA Cup. The eighth place finish is unacceptable. Is the worst finish for United in the Premier League era. But I think Ineos have done a fantastic job of recruitment. Finally, we see a plan. I mean, after last season where we were talking, here about how they had the worst window, and it really showed, to be honest, when you saw Mason Mount, you look, where does he fit? Um, I think this season that they had a plan of where they needed to recruit. They had clear weaknesses and they addressed them. Right back was a big weakness. They sell Wan Bissaka, they pick up Mazraoui. I think that's an upgrade, a player who can play on both of the fullbacks. They need depth at center forward. They go get Joshua Zirkzee, a player who's really good at linking, in between the lines. I think Hoyland, while he's more of that raw, aggressive forward, Zirkzee is more of someone who can drop deep between the lines. Up, he's self-described as like a half nine, half 10. To bring in Delict and Yoro on top of the center backs that they have in Martinez and Lindelof is great. Finally, they have some proper depth at that position, something they've struggled with, frankly, in the past. And now they're trying to get Ugarte over the line, which would be just fantastic business. Um, yeah, I think the coach is holding them back rather than the recruitment, and I think last season it was really both. So, do they have the talent to finish in the top four? I think absolutely. I think again it just really depends on Marcus Rashford. It's just Marcus Rashford for me. So I mean, they have Garnacho. They bring Amad Diallo, who played a lot today. Um, Jaden Sancho, I think he's on the way out. I don't know if he's gonna play this season too much. And then Bruno Fernandez is Bruno Fernandez. Obviously, we critique him a little. We critique him here, but when healthy, when in form, he's one of the best players at his position in the league for sure. I think they're third. I think part of that is just going to be the question marks with Chelsea, the question marks with Spurs defense, and the question marks with Liverpool's transition. And that leads us to the top two. Excuse me. Sorry, I was getting water. That leads us to the top two, and I think this is everybody's top two, and that's Arsenal and Manchester City. Is it going to be five in a row? Is it going to be Arsenal's first Premier League after really two excruciating last 2 years? I don't think so. And I'm gonna explain why. I have Arsenal second, I have City first. We'll go one by one. First of all, for Arsenal, like City, they haven't really made too much signings. Their team hasn't changed, the core hasn't changed. I think the problem for Arsenal is the same thing we've been talking about all of last season that they haven't addressed. First of all, they get Timber back. That's important. They get Calafiori from Bologna. Fantastic, fantastic signing. For me, the problem is this: Martinelli, Jesus, and Havertz, whatever Jesus, Havertz, whoever's playing. Their right side with Odegaard, Saka is more than good. I mean, middle and right side is more than good enough. The problem for me becomes in these difficult games, like I said last season. I don't think they have a player at striker who can just make the difference and go get 2 goals when the whole team is playing like garbage and win a game they have no business winning. One weakness, one question mark in the attack, whether it's Martinelli, Jesus, Havertz, that's fine. Two is a problem. I think if they don't get Ivan Toney, obviously they were in they were in the conversation for Sesko. They were in the conversations for Nico Williams. They didn't get both of those guys. I don't think that Osimhen fits the profile of what Arteta is looking for in terms of his ability to link up the play. I think he's more of a target and a pressing forward. But if they don't get Tony or someone, just a number 9, they just need a proper number 9. That's, I think, the difference. If they do, I think we start to have conversations. If they do, I think we start to have conversations with regards. I think we start to have conversations with regards to where they finish. But I think currently, as things stand, I cannot see them winning the league. Obviously, and then we'll talk about City, and then we get into the final team, which is Manchester City. They haven't made too much signings this summer. The big one has been Savio, obviously, from who played for Girona last season, but they lose Julian Alvarez. So Bob, I think, is gonna have to step into the gap in terms of the striker. But I think this is gonna be a huge season for Erling Haaland. Obviously, we talk about Arsenal not having a number 9 that I really have confidence in to just win games. Erling Haaland is the definition of someone who can do something like that. So as long as Pep's there, as long as Arsenal don't have that difference maker other than obviously Saka, Odegaard, fantastic, but as a striker, I think that this is their league to lose. Obviously 4 in a row, why not make it 5? It's like a cop out almost. I think last season, I almost struggled with this question last season more than this season, but I think this season Manchester City win the league. I think it's going to be close again. Obviously, both those teams are fantastic in the top 2. It'll be a two-headed race for me again. But I think Erling Haaland takes off again. I think we see a 25-plus goal season from him. Again, no Alvarez to compete with for minutes. And I think that they make a move before the end of the window for sure. I mean, they are like at a plus... they're at a plus 91 million euros in terms of expenditure right now. So I think that a big signing comes through before the end of the window. We'll see who that is. Obviously, we thought it was going to be Paqueta, but with the suspension, that changes things. So we'll see who they bring in before the end of the window. But yeah, that's my 20-1. I have Manchester City winning. I have Arsenal, United, and Liverpool rounding out the top 4. With Forest, Leicester, Southampton going down. Thanks again, guys, for listening. It's been a really, really good episode. And obviously, we'll see this weekend. We can just quickly talk through some of the games. Today we had the Manchester United game, obviously the late winner from Joshua Zirkzee, who we mentioned. Tomorrow we see Ipswich and Liverpool. That's going to be really, really interesting to see 2 of the teams that we talked about. I think the big games to me circled are that one and the Chelsea City game. So, yeah, we'll see. I think the Chelsea City game is going to have a lot of goals, and obviously we'll be here next week to talk through things normally with myself and Abdi. So, yeah, been a pleasure, guys. Thanks again, and looking forward to a really, really awesome season. And let's see how accurate these predictions are, how wrong I am. And hopefully I didn't upset too many fan bases. But yeah, thanks again, guys, so much. And see you guys next week. Cheers.